Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Fake Accents Unite. Lovely to see everybody in the chat there, including the regulars, Mr. Gently Benevolent, Meh, Colin P. Smith, Sunny Jim, Right Honourable Fairs, and others, including... inclusive. I don't even know what I'm saying this evening. I'm joined, as always, apart from last week when he was unfortunately struck down by a strange case of... I don't know, some kind of venereal disease. The Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Yes, I was wanting to tell you, careful about the netball team. There's all sorts of things they can pass on.
It's not my fault. I've been fine. But what about yourself, Britisher? You've been struck down.
Well, now I was off last week.
You've been struck down with various illnesses across time.
Yeah, I was itching.
Oh no! I don't want to know what you've been scratching. Oh no!
I did learn about the netball team.
Too much information, Mr. Britisher, sir. Too much information. If that is your real name. We're also joined back by popular demand by Joz, who quite kindly stepped in as a kind of reserve Britisher last week. Good evening, Joz.
Evening. I seem to have graduated from Britisher replacement to actually wanting me here.
I wanted you here last week as well, of course.
Top of the reserve list. We'll put it that way.
Top of the reserve list. You've knocked O'Wine off his perch. Clearly, that's something to be said. But yes, welcome to everybody. Britisher, I assume that you've recovered from whatever it is that you contracted last week.
Oh well, I mean it's always difficult to recover if you're in such a decrepit state as my body is. But for now, I'm over it. But give me 5 minutes, and I might be dying again.
Oh, terribly exciting!
As I said to you before we came on air, whatever you do, just don't get old.
Just don't get old. This is the case.
Yes, because otherwise you'll end up in my state.
I'm doing my absolute best.
We're doing our very absolute best. Like I can feel deep within myself the desire to resist the aging process. It's going on. Mr. Naysayer says your accent's not fake enough, Jaws. You need to give us your best fake accent.
What are you talking about? I'm actually a Brummie.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a slow news week this week, chaps. I have to say, we had the whole thing last week with the Suez Canal and the Ever Given, which passed relatively quickly, much to the disappointment of the advanced meme lords among us who were desperately trying to come up with more and more interesting ways in which to personify the Ever Given.
Have you heard that they want to make another? There's a plan put forward by the United Nations, no less, of a Suez 2.
Electric Boogaloo?
Another Suez Canal.
A second, like, as in, to actually create another Suez Canal as opposed to...
Yes, except it wouldn't go anywhere near Suez. Because obviously the Suez Canal is named after some place called Suez.
So,
whereas this would be from the other branch of the Red Sea, that kind of creates the Sinai Peninsula. So
right.
Rather than take the western branch, you would take the eastern branch, and then you would travel up the Israeli-Egyptian border, and then from there cut across into the Mediterranean. And this is now seriously being discussed, given that one noticed one has a bit of a problem if one of these ships gets itself stuck. So this is not kind of nonsense 1st of April or whatever. Apparently this really is being debated.
Created...
Yeah, it's quite a bit longer.
Yes, it would be longer, but if you consider that they dug that Suez Canal in the 19th century and we're now in the 21st,
true.
The technology would be there quite easily to create something that's about 4 times as long as the Suez Canal.
It did take a couple of global empires to do it, right?
Well, yes. Whereas now you would just need some, dredgers
Will the new canal be observing social distancing for all of its ships when it goes down there?
Well, I mean, who knows? Depends on whether the figureheads are wearing masks or not.
Oh God! Imagine there's like a new fleet of like, I know we utilize these enormous sort of container ships. The word for them escapes me right now, but just I have in my mind the image of like a new set of 19th century galleons, that have been carved out of whatever local wood there is, Lebanese cedar wood. Why not? And then
Not that galleons are very 19th century, but carry on.
Yeah, well,
Come on, that's so obvious.
I mean, it's only a seafaring nation we live in, but continue.
We've only
Disgusting.
But remember, I was in the Air Force, not the Navy.
Well, yes. I mean, next we'll be discussing the 19th century aircraft carriers.
Oh, shush.
Yeah, shut up, Britisher. That's what you want to say. Just go ahead, do it.
I would like to see them try and dig a canal right past the Gaza Strip. That would be interesting.
Yes, that would be interesting. I mean, I believe they're also doing quite a lot of work, or at least they have been doing a lot of work, I think, also on the Panama Canal, haven't they? They've kind of really, rescaled that thing to be able to take a lot bigger ships. And now, no doubt, they're wondering whether that was a good idea.
Are we now at the stage where we've contextualizing all of the canals in the world by, like, the fact that they are canals? This gives them some kind of shared identity in the shipping lane world and that sort of thing, despite the fact that they're on almost opposite sides of the globe.
Well, yes, but I think it's fair to compare the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal. I mean, they're both unbelievably important sort of trade arteries, aren't they?
They're both for bypassing, an entire continent's worth of sailing, I guess.
Yeah,
it's not quite the Manchester Shipping Canal we're talking about here.
No, not the canal which separates the River Cuckmere from the rest of the UK. That sort of thing.
Same level, yeah.
It must be the same. There must be I had a kayak got stuck in the canal via the Cuckmere. This is Suez all over again.
I'm just imagining some quaint little canal boat wedge sideways.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for, of course, when they commission this new canal, for there to be a secondary commission in order to get another boat stuck in this secondary canal as well. Just so that they have the same kind of history together.
Yes, it's this sort of you got to christen it, right? Wedging a half-kilometre long container ship sideways. I wonder, is there a limit to the size of these container ships? Because I know with aircraft it all goes down to the size of runways, right?
Yeah.
But for the ships, presumably you can build a port large enough to have a significantly larger ship.
I mean, the ships are pretty much designed according to the standards of what the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal will allow.
If they were to be widened, say, then surely that means you could just build even bigger ships.
Chances are, yes, you would start building bigger ships.
I imagine with such things it comes down to the depth of said canals more than the width of them, because you don't want them to be, scraping along the bottom as you go. Quite the endeavour.
Yes, but as soon as you're out to sea, in the Mediterranean or the Indian Ocean or whatever, then the size of your ship is kind of irrelevant. You could have a floating island, pretty much.
Was it you, Britisher, a couple of shows ago who mentioned about the issue the Chinese are having at the moment with their shipping?
I say a lot of things and then don't remember them 1 or 2 weeks later.
Oh, yes,
so
I
who
forgot.
knows?
I forgot about your
what were we referring to?
China has basically shipped, so a lot of ships go in and out of China, right? And China obviously exports an exorbitant amount of product, but the issue is that they don't have enough containers now because of all the COVID restrictions and everything trapping, various different ships.
I think I might have mentioned something. Yes, I picked something up on the news that there was a problem with containers all being in the wrong place.
They literally do
not have enough. This will no doubt not have been helped by this recent event in the Suez Canal.
They literally do not have enough containers left in China to move the product that is stuck at the docks waiting to be loaded onto these container
The really frustrating bit is that if only we could find something to export east, because apparently the rates for shipping containers eastwards are something like a third or even less than the rate for shipping containers in a westward direction.
Is this because of tariffs on our side, or
no? It's to do with demand. Because most of so many of the containers going back to China or Indonesia or whatever, they're all empty.
Right.
Because they're just export hubs.
Yes.
So when those containers leave, they're mostly full. So therefore they'll reduce the rates in order to get something to ship eastward. One of the problems is that we just we can't get into the Chinese market because even though we're told we can, we can't. And yes, by and large, all these countries like Indonesia or whatever are developing nations, and they don't really need that many Jaguars.
Now that
China does take a lot of Jaguars.
No,
that's if they don't build them themselves by now.
Well, exactly. I mean, my dad does work around that sort of thing. And yeah, what was he was saying something about because of all the social distancing and all the measures in China, they're basically, a lot of people are kind of just refusing to use the public transport anymore. That the demand for cars has gone up through the roof. And it's funny because the people who are rich enough to buy cars, which is the sort of upper middle class of China, of which there are millions, they like in the UK and America, when people buy cars, they want all the fancy things in the front. In China, they always want all the fancy things in the back because they always are rich enough to hire a chauffeur.
Makes sense, yes.
Because it costs about 3 times as much to buy a Land Rover, say in China, as it does over here. So if you're rich enough to afford that, you're probably rich enough to have a chauffeur as well.
Speaking of public transport that you mentioned just briefly there, Jaws, I do wonder now that we are entering the kind of digital age with regards to these sorts of things, the way we pay for things, and how most of the buses and so on in the UK will eventually become contactless payment sort of driven. I mean, I know
they're not already.
Sorry?
If they're not already. A significant amount of the ones that I use are.
I mean, I know they are in the cities, but you'd be surprised how much of rural Britain there is, and how much that is still a cash-driven economy, despite proclamations to the contrary from the capital and that sort of thing. But you do wonder about when effectively payment becomes that flexible, because as we all know, this is just a speculation on my part, but we all know that buses are terribly inefficient, shall we say, about when it comes to their fuel economy, unless they're full or above half capacity or whatever it happens to be, at which point they're less carbon than driving an actual regular vehicle, car and that sort of thing. So you wonder whether or not there'll be things like that. If you're the first to get on the bus or whatever, it'll be cheaper, and then or more expensive. It could even go the other way. But I think to incentivize people onto public transport, it'll be cheaper. So if you get onto a packed bus, it'll be more expensive, and then your incentive end is to wait for an emptier bus and then get on that emptier bus, and therefore they all become more fuel efficient on aggregate.
So they spread the number of people over several buses rather than...
Yeah, I mean, you can make the decision if you really need to get to where you're going and that sort of thing. You can get on the bus that's packed and pay a slightly higher rate and that sort of thing. Or, it could be more expensive to get on an empty bus and that sort of thing. I don't know. It might be
I want Bitcoin buses.
Bitcoin buses. That's what we're looking at right now.
I've seen corner shops around where I used to live before I left the city. I saw corner shops taking Bitcoin.
Interesting. I mean, I know that Bitcoin has obviously shot up in value over the last year, and really has recovered rather well, I think we would say, since 2017 when it had the big crash.
Yes, by about 5 or 6 times, I think.
Well, it went. I think at its peak, because everyone was going mad, because of course it was like $18,000 or something like
yes.
that. And now it went up to, I think it peaked at 58,000 this year. So
it is currently, well, in pounds, it is currently 42,000. I don't know what that is in dollars.
Yeah, so about around 50 to 55k and that sort of thing. Just a food for thought, I suppose, which came to mind when you mentioned that it's cheaper to travel one way than it is to travel the other. British it's whether or not that would end up being applied on a local level, just because we now have the capability to do it, although not necessarily the bureaucracy is capable of handling that, right?
I feel that the bureaucracy is a bit of a problem there.
Sorry?
Bureaucracy, I think, is the bottleneck.
Quite possibly. But that killed that stone dead anyway. This tells you how interesting the conversation is going to be on this episode of Fake Accents Unite, ladies and gentlemen. Very little has happened in the past week, really, that I'm aware of, unless the Britisher has some stonking great news from the week that was to kind of bring to the table. I mean, I know.
What sort of thing are we looking for? I mean, today I put out a tweet, and no doubt you cling on my every tweet, don't you?
Oh, so much.
Which was from The Guardian, of all places, which we all love. Which was about teaching union suggesting that black history should be taught across all subjects in UK schools. And I just put a quote, a little paragraph from the article in the tweet that just says, "We built the pyramids, developed modern numbers, built universities. Our ancestors were philosophers, scientists, military strategists, authors, writers, activists, and so much more," she said. So yes, this is the sort of drive to want to see black history. Well, let's face it, African history in everything. And you just notice that in all the things that she lists there, tailoring was not one that she lists in the achievements.
They're tailoring, as in actual tailoring, or she was tailoring the new tailoring.
Actual tailoring. We were philosophers, scientists, military strategists, authors, writers, activists. Yes, she doesn't mention tailors. Because by the time we arrived there and so brutally colonized them all, many of them were running around in loincloths and grass skirts, weren't they?
Could you make a nice lounge suit out of savannah grass?
To me, this is sort of a red rag to a bull, this whole thing, because this is deliberate sort of corruption of history in order to allow for political demands of the day.
The subject that finally racialized the Britisher was tailoring amongst the minority masses, or the lack thereof.
It annoys me that they're going to try and shoehorn a subject of history into things like maths and science. That's my background.
I mean, black history, they did not build the pyramids. I'm sorry.
But like, in fact, like the whole concept.
Numbers. But that was the Arabs. And things like zero and whatever came from India. So it's the Indians and the Arabs, not the Africans.
I mean, look, chaps, like when they talk about black, of course, they just co-opt every single ethnic minority who doesn't happen to be white.
Yes.
They're not talking... Minority History Month. Let's talk about what the Polish, achieved and that sort of thing. It's not what's going on.
Copernicus.
But black history. Black history is it's such an infuriating concept. I think I was talking to you about this earlier in the week, Jaws, as well. When I can understand a black identity in some respects being formed in America, right? This is something because, of course, the pan African slave trade, pan-Atlantic slave trade, basically a lot of the people who were brought across from that don't know their heritage. They don't know their history. They don't have a strong sense of national identity. They're not coming over. They're not going. They're Black Americans. They're African Americans. They're not, Kenyan Americans or Nigerian Americans and that sort of things. And the ones who do have that are very much, they don't really identify with the black stereotype in America. I'm trying to think of the country now. I think it's Nigerian Americans who they massively overperform the African American population. They have absolutely no ties to the black identity as it's typically construed, and they they perform really rather well. And
I've seen the odd Twitter war between Africans and African Americans, and you see things like, "My ancestors sold you to the white man for some guns."
It drives me mad because the concept of a white and a black identity is one of those things which is very American. Like the conceptualization of the black identity comes from the obliteration of the history of the people who were brought to America through slavery. The introduction of a white identity comes from the Americans distancing themselves in some regards to their history with from Europe. So,
well, there's the American white identity, and then there's the sort of Germanic white identity.
What you mean, like the whole Aryan thing, which is also kind of Mesopotamian.
Yes. Well, Aryan is kind of Indo-European.
Aryan's funny because, of course,
in modern times, it's taken to mean Germanic.
Yeah, I mean, Aryan's funny because, of course, like the Turks consider themselves to be Aryan. Like they're the only Aryan people left are the Turkish. You know, that's how they consider themselves. But it infuriates me when you see this kind of a disgusting reductive agenda being pushed over here, as you say, Bridger, like this idea that we must decolonize and push black history into things where you just go, there is no such thing. History is history. You are categorizing history in a way that you want and prioritizing history in the way that you want, with no regard for anything even remotely meritocratic. Even if you were to do this, the history that you're talking about is then being relegated to a day, a month, a year, or whatever it is that they do. You know, it's now, it may as well be Black History 6 months or whatever they call it.
It's a secular religious holiday, right?
Yeah, basically. It's the sort of thing where, in America, I think it was America where they did Black History Month or something, and somebody pinned George Floyd's toxicology report to it. And
wow.
And they were investigating a potential white supremacist incident, and you just go like, oh my goodness, this is the other thing, tacking white supremacy onto any opponent of the racialization of education is, to me, also insane, because there is
you could put your accelerationist hat on and be like, this means people are going to look into the history of the empire more.
I could take the but the accelerationists aren't even really accelerationists. I mean, they think that they are, and they also think, like accelerate an impending race war or whatever, or just get to the point where people, every single person, but their goals in many ways are exactly the same as the racists themselves, in that they want people to have. They don't want there to be any separation between the personal and the political, right? They know that people who don't have a separation between these two things are able to politicize anything and everything, and there are certain structures which are in place at the moment in order to, push for that. And they can use their specialist lobbying groups to influence government and that sort of thing. And I just see that as very, very, very unhealthy. I don't know what there is to be done about it, but I don't think that effectively getting everybody on board with the racist agenda so that they can then push back because they think they'll win is the right move either. Do you know what I mean?
What I more mean is that, which is kind of what's happened to me, is that my education on the empire was extremely limited. A bit, I mean, like half of a history lesson at school. So when all this started being pushed, I ended up basically kind of Googling things, like looking at videos, Wikipedia articles, and eventually books about it. And I'm like, well, it actually doesn't sound that bad. Like, I know there's the slave trade, but there was a lot done to put an end to that and deal with that.
I think the closest my education came to colonial thought would happen to be would be Queen Victoria, who is briefly mentioned. Like, you might have done one small module on her because, of course, as part of the monarchs rather than anything else, and contextualizing the Victorian age. And
it's either the monarch or it is how some random steelworker lived.
Yeah, and then there's
in England, like there's no in between.
And there's also the abolition of slavery. So you do a section on William Wilberforce, and you see some of the it comes to mind very easily, like the pictures of the marketing and the messaging of the time, of like that poster saying abolish the slave trade now and that sort of thing. But
it's funny, I had no idea that England had anything to do with the end of slavery in the West outside of America until I was like 20.
Oh really?
I just wasn't told. Nobody told me.
There's that private education for you.
I know. But my education on the Empire was we did like medieval, then Tudors and Stuarts, the English Civil War, and then I think my teacher knew that the next term we were basically moving on to World War One. And he was like, okay, I'm going to give you 20 minutes, and he just drew like a map of Africa and some arrows, being like, this is where different countries went.
Yeah, I mean,
and that was it. That's all I had.
I was not educated on. I mean, you're briefly told that the Commonwealth exists, but you don't know what countries it really comprises.
Well, that's I got from watching the Commonwealth Games opening ceremony.
Right, but nobody does that apart from people in your privileged background, Joss. So who knows?
My brother's a sports nut, so I'll use that excuse.
And then obviously, like, I wasn't told. I don't know when the. I mean, I'm revealing my own ignorance here, but I wasn't. I wouldn't be able to tell you offhand the year when the British Empire really came into being. I wouldn't be able to tell you the stages of its growth or development. I wouldn't be able to tell you when it ended, really, unless I consider that it ended in the mid 20th century. But that's only because I've then done research on the 20th century, which we obviously focus a lot more on during our educational period. Like, we know lots about World War II, but know virtually nothing about World War One, and then I would say there's an enormous blind spot between then and the Middle Ages.
Pretty much, yeah. As I said, we did Henry VIII to death.
Henry VIII.
And then the next thing is basically World War One.
I think the Civil War gets a look in, surely.
Yes,
I know fuck all about the English Civil War. I don't know who was on either side. I don't know why it happened or why it ended.
The big gap in sort of public knowledge is the entire 18th century.
Yes.
That basically, one moment one doesn't really teach, the American War of Independence to any great deal over here because it was just another war.
No, I can say that I have friends who did history A-level, and that was half of their mandatory teaching for A-level was the American War of Independence.
Okay. But, when it comes to, say, the conquest of India or something like that,
there's nothing about that.
The entire subcontinent that sort of falls into the hands of the British at some point. But yes, it's just the 17th century, we don't really have much of an empire at all. And then the 18th century, we're a world power, and the 19th century, we're the behemoth, and we dominate everything. And you just go, how exactly did this happen? And the gap is the 18th century. That's the thing that people aren't really told about.
I remember talking to my little brother when he's doing a history degree, and I was chatting to him before he went off to do his degree when he was sort of 18. I asked him sort of what period of history he wanted to study, because I was thinking, maybe you could look into that because I don't know anything about it. And he said, no, nothing really happened around that time. And now I'm looking back and I'm like, are you joking? There was about 3 different world wars. The 7 Years' War, Spanish Succession, like all these things happened.
As Tranquility Base says in the chat, I think you're right, Mark. The Empire isn't really fetishized, and to claim that it is, or that the products of it are fetishized, is patently absurd.
This is what I'm saying. If people are now forced to learn about it in terms of the slavery was bad angle, then it may be that they look into more details of it, find that it actually wasn't that bad compared to other empires. We
learned a lot about Guy Fawkes. Guy Fawkes is a big thing. Again, just because I assume we still celebrate Bonfire Night, at least in most parts of the country. And
yes, I think that would more than likely be the relevance of it. Yes, and simply wants to explain to you a national holiday
that comes around. And we also
why are we burning this man on a bonfire?
And we also had quite a lot about the Romans. Not a great deal, but more about the Romans in Britain. And I think that's also because a great number of school trips can be put around going to little Roman landmarks and palaces and whatnot around the country.
Also, I think the Romans are kind of seen as the beginning of history.
Yeah, yes. I would say so. Yeah, that seems.
I remember. At my school. I did a classical civilizations GCSE, which was all Romans. People did Latin and that, so there was a lot of Roman history going on. There wasn't as much. The actual history department itself was kind of underplayed compared to the classics.
The state of this country, where we know more about the Roman Empire than we do about our own.
It's this sort of strange thing, the sort of the origin story. So I think in that regard, we are pretty much the origin story to the Americans, and the Romans would effectively be the origin story to us. So prior to that is a kind of pre-ancient Dark Age.
Well, there's the strange obsession with the Egyptians, which I guess is a bit of a hangover from the Europeans, right?
Well, the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians, the Persians, the Greeks, all that stuff. Sure, it predates that, but it's the sort of precursor to that civilization, but it in no way touches Britain. So the first time any ancient power really touches Britain is really when the Romans arrive. So
that's
as
reflected.
We would see it, civilization, the ability to write one's own name arrived in Britain with the Romans.
The big things that we're taught came out of the Romans, aside from the roads, because of course that was a big thing, is kind of, I suppose, the conquering of the native Britons. Boudica is mentioned, of course, as
she's a feminist icon, so of course she's got to be front and center.
Of course, Practicus,
the warrior queen of Britain, and that sort of thing, and some brief stuff about how we were all savages at that point, especially the Celts. Good grief. But
yet the other queen doesn't really get a mention, does it? Because as Caractacus was the guy who fought the Romans, not just like Boudica in some kind of wild rage, but his was a sort of a real, proper sort of resistance campaign. But he ended up somewhere up north, somewhere Lancashire or whatever. He basically ended up in the territory of another queen, who then handed him over to the Romans.
Who was this queen?
For some reason, that Brittonic queen doesn't get much of a mention. But
Northern women.
What was her name? Do you know?
I can't remember offhand.
Oh, fair enough. I don't know what your education was like. Obviously, it's difficult talking about British education when you were never subjected to it, British.
Yes, I was never at school in this country.
What was? What was your trajectory to learning all this stuff, I wonder?
Well, in most of Europe, really, it's the Romans that are kind of seen as the beginning of time. The Greeks will be an exception, if you understand what I mean. But most countries will really sort of see Roman history touching their territory as this is whence history comes from. History comes. So I think everybody pretty much does the same thing. The Greeks, obviously, they will emphasize the fact that they had Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and whatever. So they've got a sort of a bit of a head start. But by and large, everybody starts with the Romans. But this is just it. You mentioned before.
Yeah.
The claim that we get from a lot of sort of militant black campaigners and whatever, that the whites stole their history. We didn't. We gave them a history. Without us, they wouldn't be in history. Because they didn't write it down.
Are you speaking specifically of the descendants of the slaves, or like just generally?
Sub-Saharan Africa, I'm assuming.
All of them. The descendants of the slaves came from Africa. And the African tribes themselves, they also had no known history.
Well, they had no written history. Like, in terms of the kind of global understanding of history, where people will understand how different powers have shifted over time, Certainly, this is the case. I mean, Africa was very fractious, just a series of warring tribes in various places, and kingdoms obviously spanning great distances themselves. Of course, they had a semblance of countries and that sort of thing. But
Benin was all based on slavery, right?
Yeah, right. This is the other thing. Is it's like your ancestor. When you look at these things, they go, "Oh, my ancestors were slaves enslaved by you," and it's like, no, your ancestors were slaves bought by us. But you were the slaves, or you were slaves because you were conquered
Portuguese
tribes.
men running around in Portuguese men with nets running around the Sahara.
Well,
the only reason they're alive today is because the white man bought them.
They would be slaughtered in Africa, or at least forgotten. It's like, and I'm not even saying be grateful, right? Because that seems like a silly thing.
No,
but just recognizing what the reality is.
So where would you sooner be? I mean, even if your ancestors wouldn't have been slaughtered, which, well over 90% of them would have been if they wouldn't have been a saleable product, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
If it wouldn't be for that, even if they would have just been left alone to live, then the question has to be, Oprah Winfrey, where would you sooner be today? In America, or some person in a village in Upper Nigeria?
But don't you realise, Britisher, if Oprah had been in Wakanda, then Wakanda would be the greatest power that Africa had ever known.
Yeah, but we all know that that's complete nonsense, don't we?
America owes its current power to Oprah Winfrey. What are you talking about?
Well, the future presidentess. But it's, never say never, because, after Trump, anything can happen.
I mean, we don't even... There are several things about slavery which are weird and aren't recognised as well, which is things like, well, first off, the slave traders told the African tribes they were buying the slaves from to stop treating their slaves so badly, making them into eunuchs.
Because otherwise they wouldn't survive the passage.
Otherwise they wouldn't survive the passage, right? And so, if you want to call it this,
they started paying them more for the slaves being in better condition.
And this was an incentive. And if they want to, if you want to call it the civilizing of the slave trade, then we can call it that, as civilized as slavery could ever be. But they then so that improved the stock. Whether or not that incentivized them to conquer more tribes in order to gain more slaves to then have a stock is another question entirely, but which I can't answer.
Probably did, let's be honest.
But I mean, if you look at Benin, which already had a roaring slave trade, it's likely that they just had they just changed the methods, right, rather than ramped up production, as it were. And even if they did ramp up production, this is what eventually led to a unified culture across Benin, and I'm just using that country as an example, but it's probably what caused tribal alliances and countries to form across Africa, which were then obviously colonized and turned into bastions of other places.
There was a quote from the king of Benin. I'm trying to find it.
Where he said, like, if there's something like the jewel in the crown of Benin is its slave trade. Do not.
Yeah, he said stuff like the women sing their children to sleep with tales of our enemies reduced to slavery. That sort of thing. It's like such a deep part of their culture.
It's also a peculiar thing as well that they focus with such vehemence on the British Empire, for instance, whereas they never there's never a kind of, and I think British, it's because, as you say, they see Britain more than other nations, like more than Spain and Germany and France as the progenitors of America, where unlike the French Canadians and that sort of thing. But they never focus on the methods of other empires of the time, like
Portugal and Brazil was the worst.
Yeah, Portugal and Brazil. But like, even take the French. There's a reason why every single country in that was colonized by France has had its local languages obliterated, and that's because they executed people who refused to learn French. And they just mandated that French was the the language of the French colonies, and that's why places like Haiti, places like Mali, etc., all still speak French or a variation thereof today, whereas Britain was remarkably lenient when it came to.
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, in Mali they do have. I've not heard of the fact that they don't have domestic languages in Mali. It's not as if they only can speak French. You have to understand that when it comes to these things, French is much superior to the language they otherwise would have. So, just in the same way as English is such a wide-spoken language all across the former territories of the British Empire, simply because it's such a superior language to the much less evolved languages. I mean, I once couldn't help but laugh myself silly once hearing a Pakistani general talking. I'm assuming he was talking Urdu. I don't know. They've got several languages, but
yes.
I assume it was Urdu. And he was talking, and then in the middle of this babble of which I understood nothing, he once in a while said, intelligence, reconnaissance. And you just think, yes, they don't have words for these things. So they've just adopted the English word into their language in order to fill out the gaps.
I had that at my school. We had a lot of boys from Hong Kong came over to be educated here, and obviously doing a lot of sort of maths and science stuff. I ended up spending a lot of time with them, and them talking about the stuff we were learning to each other. It's like differential equation. It's funny when you hear that sort of thing coming out.
Yeah, I mean, you can't. It's you suddenly can see the sort of glaring gaps in other languages. And yes, I mean, French would be a much superior language than anything that would have been spoken in Mali at the time when they were there. So you can imagine that most government business and whatever in Mali these days will be conducted in French, just because it's nigh on impossible to, talk about the budget in a local language, I would assume.
And again, look what we're doing here in the way that we're discussing these, picking out individual countries amongst the African continent and using them for specific examples. Absolutely none of this can be contextualized as some kind of universal black experience.
Yes.
Which I find infuriating. I mean, you only have to look at what's going on in South Africa at the moment, for instance, where the descendants of people who moved to South Africa after apartheid ended, who are now in power, are setting laws for expropriation without compensation and reparations from the Swedelanders, and basically saying you owe us money because you abused the country. It's like you were never here. You were never.
Yes, yeah. The Boers settled on land that was actually not occupied by anybody else. It wasn't as if the blacks were farming it and then they took the farmland away and started farming it. No, this was virgin land that they broke and made arable.
With regards to your complexities of language, Patricia, I mean, I do want to point out that we do borrow a lot of our language from places like French, double entendres and that sort of thing. It's not that we.
Yes, I mean, it's ours is very much a sort of hybrid language.
And they borrow modern words from us as well. Internet, hot dog.
Hot dog.
It's just not the ideal example if we're trying to give an impression of civilization. I hope there are many Americans listening and are sufficiently annoyed to comment.
To make a habit of annoying Americans.
Anyway, yeah.
But no, it gets my goat when I hear about the stolen black history and things like that, when you just think, hang on a moment, if it wasn't for the European powers, you wouldn't have a history. Because when it comes to the various, chiefs and whatever with whom we did business when it comes to slave trade and things like that, the people who wrote their names down were us. These histories would otherwise not exist. It would be a blank space.
Because they don't write it down. I mean, the oral traditions are different, and as soon as the people are wiped out, which happened fairly frequently, then those peoples were gone.
Well, but I mean, even if the people are not wiped out, how much history does the oral tradition preserve?
I don't know, but
it takes some sort of mythical quality, I suppose.
I mean, look at Viking history and whatever. Okay, we know of their sort of mythology and whatnot, but when it comes to sort of much of their history, it's just dark. There's nothing there. A lot of the Viking names, Ivar the Boneless and things like that, that's because we wrote the name down because he was active here.
Wasn't it Alfred the Great who started a lot of the recording of history, in especially the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle?
Well, yes, it would be kings like Alfred the Great who were fighting the sort of the Viking hordes, and it would be those people who would actually be noting it down. But it wasn't Vikings.
I don't know if you've ever looked at the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, but it does start at the beginning of time as they would conceive of it, right? Like biblical times. But it's the sort of biblical times kind of hybridized with ancient Saxon mythology. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes more and more sort of crystallizes into real events that we recognize.
Well, I mean, many civilizations have a sort of semi-mythical beginning, in which you kind of realize that there is some sort of early history that has pretty much become some sort of legend that is woven into a mythology that goes further back. So at some point, the sort of myths slowly begin to develop into something that is sort of semi-historical, and then real history begins.
Yeah, Rome has like 3 or 4 different...
well, yes, yeah, I mean, you've got things like the Aeneid, you've got Romulus and Remus and things like that. So you've got things that more than likely there is something there, but most of it's just completely made up. But there's a kernel of truth more than likely.
To make it memorable, isn't it? If it's larger than life. Just to bring it back to sort of the discussion we were having at the beginning about Black history being taught as black history, right? It's also as
a all-encumbering part of all subjects.
So it's also a question of like what things influenced our history as a whole. To take something simple, mathematics, something like Pythagoras' theorem. I remember there being a big a big discussion in the media about whether or not we should be calling it Pythagorean theorem because someone in the Middle East, in the Islamic age of plenty or something that they were calling it, developed something similar that may have been the same theorem, and you're like, but they had absolutely no effect over here. It's not like that idea was then translated across the continent and then Pythagoras rediscovered it or something. It's the fact that they used it. Pythagoras used it. It revolutionized the way in which a lot of architecture was developed. It changed the way we thought about geometry and obviously triangles. But
Pythagoras' theorem is probably the most important equation or like idea ever.
One of anyway. So like Pythagoras coming to this idea of his own volition or otherwise, and then marketed that idea and also like just revolutionized so much across the whole continent of Europe, which then informed so much else, which then informed a lot of other things. And therefore Pythagoras is the figure who developed this for the use of the Europeans. It doesn't matter even if somebody developed it 200 years ago in a cave somewhere, if nobody read it, or if it was destroyed.
Well, that's like Cavendish, isn't it? I don't know if you heard, Cavendish was this sort of great scientist in Britain, but he was incredibly, he had some sort of psychological condition. It made him incredibly sort of antisocial, cringingly shy. Apparently there is some anecdote of him running from a room once when a maid entered or something like that, just because he couldn't bear being in the room with her.
Absolute incel.
And he's known for certain discoveries in physics and chemistry, but when they actually went through all his notes, they discovered that the man had actually discovered several other things, but he'd never told anybody. So these things had to be rediscovered by other scientists, and they became known as the people who discovered these facts. Now, you could sort of take away their credit and say, oh, well, no, you weren't the first person to discover this. Well, yes, but they were really when it comes to society, because Cavendish never told anybody, so it never had an effect.
Yeah.
Yes, there's ideas around, ideas and technology. If there's a suitable kind of critical mass of sort of parallel ideas or technologies, then when the time is right, multiple people tend to discover ideas at the same time, right? There's all sorts of examples of this throughout history. I mean, there's the famous one is Newton and what's the German guy?
Oh, there's calculus, isn't it?
Well,
yeah.
Well, it's like I get if we want to take something modern where everyone was kind of getting on with it. Take the light bulb after sort of direct and alternating current were becoming popular. Like there's this big thing about was Edison really the one to make light bulbs happen? Actually, there was a big push from the black history scholars to claim that it was a black gentleman. And you go, but actually the number of, once the first light bulb had been developed, the number of patents for new and innovative light bulbs skyrocketed. There were like literally hundreds of them were being submitted every year. And it just so happened that this chap came up with a similar design to the one that Edison then mass marketed and had the resources to.
Well, I believe Swan eventually won the court case,
right,
and then made it with Edison.
Yeah.
I mean, Edison was sort of part of the race, and he's generally, he's seen as the great genius, but there are a lot of sort of misconceptions as to the things he actually invented.
Well, the man was clearly an asshole. I mean, if you look at the things he did when obviously alternating current was discovered, because he had put all of his money into direct current as the superior electricity, and would you really want like he was putting up having posters put up and that sort of thing, going like alternating current is so much more dangerous than direct current, despite the opposite being true.
Well, he even worked on the electric chair just to prove how dangerous it was.
Well, he lobbied the government as well to like ban it and that sort of thing.
Well, J.P. Morgan eventually got revenge on Edison on behalf of mankind, because J.P. Morgan, of course, he was the backer of Edison, because J.P. Morgan realized that this was the coming technology, and he realized that people like Rockefeller and Carnegie and Vanderbilt, they had all basically cornered one technology. So he realized, if I can get hold of this technology, then it's mine, then I will be a kind of a Rockefeller type. And he wasn't wrong. I mean, he did make absolute fortunes out of it. But
I know you wanted to say he made
when
absolute bank.
When eventually he broke with Edison, you have to understand, he kind of takes over the company completely.
Yeah.
And it is the Edison General Electric Company. And he takes over, goes with alternating current, and calls it the General Electric Company. And General Electric is still around today.
Of course, yeah.
It's sans the Edison name.
Yes, because when he was trying to prove how dangerous the AC current was, was it him who electrocuted an elephant?
Yes.
In public.
Yes. Various animals, but famously an elephant. Yes.
Just for fun,
Which is kind of
he didn't even need to prove anything on that occasion. He just fancied killing something large and in charge.
Zap.
Well, yes. I mean, it was just basically a way of demonstrating that this thing was so dangerous it could even kill something this large. So what chance does a human being stand if it can zap to death an elephant? But it's funny because Carnegie also used an elephant once. When it comes to these sort of super rich types, and these because he built the bridge over the Mississippi with steel, and he then had an elephant go ahead of the crowd, effectively, in order to prove that the bridge could hold it. Because I believe there was some sort of saying that an elephant would not cross an unsound bridge. That somehow the elephant would have an instinct; it would know.
All those,
and of course, with the elephant then just sort of striding ahead and going across the bridge. Well, in that case, the bridge must be sound.
All those famous American elephants,
Oh yes, yes.
It's amazing how many they found. It's a shame that they're extinct now. We only
Well,
hear.
Aren't they all supposed to be? Aren't all useful elephants supposed to be Indian elephants, or at least related to Indian elephants? So there might have been some Ethiopian ones, but they apparently were also related to Indian elephants. So the African elephants, so the large-eared ones, are completely useless. They're too wild. You can't do anything with them.
They're smarter, aren't they? The African ones.
Sorry?
I thought they're more intelligent, aren't they? The African
But that could
ones?
well be. That could well
There's
be.
stories of them kind of visiting the death sites of other elephants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, with what I'm getting at is things like the war elephants and whatever, Hannibal and things like that. Those would really be the Indian type elephants.
Yes.
Because you could not tame an African elephant as we know it to do such a thing. It would just tear everything to pieces.
I would have thought at the time it would be easier for Hannibal to get stuff from India than it would be for him to get stuff from sub-Saharan Africa, being based in Tunisia.
Yeah, very likely there would be trade routes. Then again, the Carthaginians apparently one of the ways in which they kind of returned again and again was to kind of look for southern trade routes. So they may indeed have been at least sort of with the third Carthaginian war prior to that. One way they were building up their coffers was by trading more than likely sub-Saharan. Who knows what they were doing?
Just reminds me of a song by Flanders and Swan about an elephant who is faking mental illness so he doesn't have to carry a howdah.
Well, there you go. Yeah, right.
Your elephant's got anxiety.
Isn't there an Oliver Reed film where it's called Hannibal something, but he's a POW or something like that, and he goes across the Alps in order to get away from the Germans. He heads towards Switzerland or whatever with the elephant.
He what?
Which is I think it's some kind of circus animal or something like that that he gets away from. It's the most unlikely Second World War film that you could possibly think of. Oliver Reed with an elephant. But it's actually quite charming, if I remember right.
I'm sorry, I still just have that song stuck in my head, just going, I'm an introverted, elephocentric hypochondriac, and I'll stick in the elephant's nursing home till I get my memory back.
I'm beginning to wonder.
That, actually.
When you say that, I'm beginning to wonder whether they actually made up some of the social justice jargon in use in academia today.
Well, they knew well. He's just I'm an amnesiac. It's like some days he's Napoleon, and others he's Orson Welles. It's just. I love Flanders as well. They were great. They did some good. They did some anti-war songs with the nuclear age and that sort of thing. But they generally they did three very funny, famous shows. One was a collection of animal songs. They did a show called At the Drop of a Hat, and another show called At the Drop of Another Hat. And it was it's very much worth your time if you have it. It's all on on the interwebs. You can find it on YouTube or Spotify or whatever your platform of choice is.
It's as you were sort of saying, you're somewhat stretched for stories and whatever this week. Did you perhaps? I don't know whether you already did these things last week or whatever, because obviously the weeks somewhat overlap. But there was a wonderful story in the Telegraph, which supposedly was debunked, but not really,
Go on.
about a professor at Oxford claiming that musical notation was colonialist.
I fucking hate
it. From the...
I hate it that it's colonial propaganda to have a standardized notation. Fuck off, mate.
I don't even know where the notation comes from for music, because a lot of it's Italian, right?
Yes, I think it was actually Italian.
What did the Italians even do?
Came from the Italians.
They weren't colonial. Well, they did a bit of colonializing, but
the earliest
doesn't matter. As far as they're concerned, they will sort of say, "Well, this could, this could sort of hurt many black students, because a lot of the music that is studied in that way is from the slave period."
Well,
and you just go, well, I mean, like that, you can just basically ban just about everything in history. Let's not talk about naval development, because it would also overlap with slave period. It just
everything is the slave period until the last 200 years, right?
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, I mean, Mesopotamia slave period, the ancient Egyptian slave period,
the pyramids.
If you're actually,
well, except of course the part that they built them.
Yes.
Yeah. It's kind of making up history as you go. It's complete gobbledygook. And what was so funny about the debunking of this is that Oxford University came out and sort of said, "Oh well, this is complete nonsense. We are not considering this." Anyway, it was only put forward by one individual, but they didn't say, "Oh, it wasn't a professor. It wasn't this," because the newspaper said, "Oh, it's a professor at Oxford University who is proposing this, and it's being considered," and they're just saying, "Oh well, no, it's not being considered," and you're referring to plural in some cases, educators and whatever. It's only one individual, so yes, there's still the main claim is still correct.
I mean, the fact
it's a professor at Oxford who is proposing this.
The fact that somebody
you just need to ask yourself, why the hell has one of the foremost universities in the world got such a balmy professor present? Shouldn't that itself be reason to fire the person?
Yes, the fact that this has even been proposed in the first place is ludicrous. If you are actually interested, modern kind of sheet music notation, it sort of originated with the printing press, so the 15th century, that sort of thing. So it was they did develop a little bit over time, but basically what happened at the beginning, because stave lines and that sort of thing had to all be added in by hand, but you could then print using particular engraving pads. Because before then it was all.
Have you ever seen the film Amadeus?
I haven't.
Because it refers to something that actually is true. I've heard on documentaries about the subject and whatever that some experts kind of marvel about this. When it comes to Amadeus's notation. So basically he's got the just sheets and he notes down his music. But what is so remarkable, and the character Salieri is kind of marveling at it in this film. You haven't seen this film, really. This is one you have to watch. And he's just basically going, this is unreal. I'm looking at his notation of the music and there are no corrections. He is writing it down perfectly. Yep. So it is fully formed as he is writing it down. He doesn't have to go back afterwards going, "Oh no, I'm going to change this particular bit." No, it's coming from his hand in perfect form. And that kind of shows that when it comes to these, utter geniuses, they are operating on some sort of different level than normal people.
Yeah, the thin end of the bell curve.
Yeah,
I mean, they said that about Michelangelo. I mean, when you look at some of his unfinished sculptures, that they're still partially trapped in the rock. that any normal human being, and this includes most sculptors, would roughly hew out the form and then get more and more detailed and work their way in. Not dear Michelangelo. He just started on one side and went through. And as he did, the figure begins to emerge out of the rock. And you look at that and you just go, that's insane. He insisted he could see the figure within the rock.
Rock sculpting is one of those things where I look at it and I just go, how? Like, I can understand a lot of people, I can understand casting, I can understand, a lot of clay work and that sort of thing, where your material is in itself, malleable and that sort of thing. But when somebody has taken what is effectively a big stone and then carved out of, a singular piece, this insane work of art, you look at that and you just go, there are people on this earth who are beyond human.
Yeah, like if you're talking Michelangelo, have either of you seen the statue of David in Florence?
I haven't been there. Yeah. God, I should have gone, because I've been to Florence and I should have visited.
It literally looks like a sort of 8-foot tall man standing there. It's outrageous. Well, you look at it and you're just like, that just looks like a guy. But obviously he's really, really tall, and you can see like the veins on his arm, and like the sort of the way the muscles knit together just looks normal.
Do you want to know the really scary bit about that statue?
Go
on.
It was actually a roughly hewn out block that another sculptor had already begun on for a different statue. So they basically suggested the commission to Michelangelo and said, do you think you could make something of this? So the reason he more than likely picked such a strange posture, where he's reaching over his shoulder for the sling, is like that he could fit the shape he wanted into the existing block.
Yes, it wasn't that he just had an unhealthy obsession with shot put or something.
So he didn't... He wasn't given a kind of, virgin block of rock. No, somebody else had already started on something completely different, and they said, well, do you think you can make something of this? And Michelangelo went, okay, everyone stand aside.
Well, clearly the original sculptor who did the rough cut deserves reparations, because without his...
well, yes.
Without... you would be livid. You would be livid, wouldn't you, if you were that guy?
You're the chap that walked away. But
it's one of those things, as I understand it, unless I'm drawing this from absolutely nowhere, but there was a big thing amongst the sculptors when making statues in such a way was very was the thing to do. It was creating flesh from stone is the direct translation, I think, and that was the thing which set the masters apart from the the apprentice is effectively the regular people, was this ability, like, because obviously, I mean, we talk about it nowadays, the uncanny valley, right? You can, if you have a painting or some kind of digital thing, it's used a lot with regards to video games, because obviously our digital ability is not such an art. The way we comprise things in digital media is not such. You play a video game, it's clearly a video game, it's not reality, and but there's like an uncanny valley which we're kind of reaching now with realistic video games, where people go, I'm a bit unsettled by this because it doesn't look quite real, which is what I think has spurred a lot of the kind of return to more basic shapes in video game media, aside from the mobile revolution, obviously. But so the sculptors would have this flesh from stone thing. So, like, anybody could do a frieze. Any competent stoneworker could do a frieze, or do potentially plants going around a pillar and that sort of thing, or even more crazy things, gargoyles and the like. But when it came to fashioning flesh from stone, when it came to making people, that was the thing which set people apart. Yeah.
Well, there's one statue that springs to mind when you say flesh from stone.
Yeah.
And that is the Rape of Proserpina. So that is where Pluto. This is one of the things that it's like the rape of the Sabine women. Rape in its more ancient form kind of means theft or abduction. So the rape of Proserpina is the abduction of Proserpina by the god Pluto. Right. It's a sculpture by Bernini.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean.
Everybody get busy Googling and look for the picture, because you will actually see how his hand indents her flesh, as I think it's on the thigh.
Yes.
So it slightly digs in so that the flesh yields to his grabbing her. So that is where you really see the rock becomes flesh. And given that marble has itself got this sort of lustrousness to it that makes it more flesh-like, that's when the real high masters begin showing off. I mean, as you said before, the veins on David's arm and whatever. But you can sort of really see where they kind of, they kind of put in a little extra and just say, okay, you're all just amateurs compared to me. And Bernini was one of them. And when you can have one figure lift up the other, and the fingers indent in the flesh of the other figure, that's when you're really taking it to another level.
Yeah, I'm looking at the...
Yes, not just the creation of characters, but the interaction therein.
Yeah,
I'm looking at the sculpture, and it's obviously there's the guy lifting up the woman, and he's got a sort of like cloth over his leg, I guess.
Yes,
and you can very much tell that it's cloth as opposed to skin, right? Obviously, because it's
what was the name of the statue? Sorry,
the Rape of Proserpina or Persephone.
Yeah, so it's Pluto. Yes, he is.
I'll send a picture to...
It's alright, I've got one. I just want to have it so that I can put it up for the stream chat so that they don't...
there's also there's that style, I can't remember what it's called, of sculpture where they essentially try to make like the
as
clothes...
many angles as possible.
Well, they try to make the clothes on the object appear wet.
Uh-huh.
I can't remember what it's called, but it is very obvious.
I'm not familiar with that particular, but I would call this another example of figura serpentina, the serpentine figure, which basically you've got these twisting figures that therefore offer a great many more attractive angles from which to look at them.
Right, yes.
The most famous one of those is by Bologna, and it's called... The Rape of the Sabine Woman, and it's three figures. So you've got one guy on the floor sort of being trodden on by the other guy who's grabbing the woman. So you've got the Sabine man and the Roman kind of grabbing the woman, if you know what I mean, because they're sort of twisting. So there's a face really in three directions, and because the figures are twisting, it's really a 360-degree viewing experience. Whereas something like David, you really, you're expected to stand in front of him and look at him, if you know what I mean.
If I paste another one to the stream chat, I mean, this is the example of what I'm talking about with the wet cloth. Like, this was the whole style of sculpture, which obviously it's incredible the way it looks, right? But if you go to
it's so delicate. That's the thing.
Yeah, and it's solid marble.
Unbelievable.
It is a whole style, and if you go to the Vatican or Florence or whatever, there's these statues all around, and it is a lot of people were doing this, and it's just the idea that there were so many masters in the same place at the same time. I'd say the one you've got on stream now, it just looks like wet cloth.
Yeah, there is. There are sort of some like death figures on Italian graves or whatever, where the cloth also drapes over the face.
Yes, I think I saw Harry in the chat saying one called the Veiled Virgin.
And it's basically it traces some of the face, so even sort of the eyelid is slightly traced, but perfectly believably.
Yes, that one.
It's absolutely unreal. I mean, like
now,
surreally real.
Now, please, gentlemen, everybody stand back and show me the African equivalent. Given that we stole all their history and that they're just as good as that. It's
to be honest, what I'm wondering is there anyone alive today who can do this anywhere?
I mean, I'm looking now. There you go, marble African bust statue, that sort of thing.
More than likely you'll come up with something like the Benin bronzes, which were all told absolutely fabulous because they could cast bronze, and you just go, well, yes, but have you heard of Greek bronzes? It's
wasn't there something like
the question is a good one as to can people still do this today? I believe there is actually still quite a lot of skill in that regard in Italy when it comes to sculpture. I remember there was some modern artists who commissioned body parts to be carved because, of course, theirs is the idea, so it's their art, even though somebody else is actually carving it for them. You get the point, because it's a post-skill era in art, so there is still some ability about, but this complete sort of total art form is more than likely gone for now. We would have to rediscover that.
There's a bronze statue of Hercules, I think, from the Vatican. Because was it that the Greeks considered marble sculpting to be kind of uncouth, and they basically did everything out of bronze?
What was wrong with marble?
Well, they just didn't like the look of it, I think.
I'm
not then it was the Romans who kind of who started off doing marble properly.
No. I mean, the Greeks definitely were already well into marble. I'm a bit surprised at the Greeks supposedly poo-pooing marble, because no, I mean they definitely were into carving marble.
So this is quite an early one of Hercules I put in, because you can see it's not quite as good, but obviously the guy's huge. The statue's huge.
Yes, you can see that.
But you don't see that many Roman
person's head.
Yeah. You don't see that many Roman bronzes, I guess.
Well, I think the Romans had a thing for making colossal bodies with somewhat small heads and also small genitalia.
Yes, that was something that only barbarians had massive genitals.
And I think it was one way in which they try to emphasize the colossal size of the body.
Yes, I mean Hercules. They always tended to make absolutely jacked. Like even more, because obviously the gods are always in decent shape, right? Apart from Dionysus, who's normally kind of a bit fatter.
The chubby one, yeah.
Yeah. But Hercules is always especially jacked.
It's a common thing to confuse, because I've done that myself in the past. Dionysius is actually quite. He is actually quite. Slim. But he has a friend. He has a friend who is a sort of bearded, pot-bellied one.
Oh, who am I? Is that Pan then that I'm thinking of?
Pan is the satyr.
Yeah, it's got the
but if you look in, I'll put it on.
Oh wait, no. Did the Roman Bacchus? Because Dionysus was kind of youthful and skinny, wasn't he?
This is Dionysus here. I put it in stream chat. There you go.
Yeah. Maybe that's a more Renaissance thing that I'm thinking of then.
No, I think it's because I've confused those figures in the past. That is apparently a drinking friend of Bacchus /
right.
And he is kind of shown as a sort of older man with a pot belly and a beard.
Yeah, Dionysus is very slim, especially compared to some of the other figures.
He's a bit of a twink, is Dionysus.
But there's this statue, which is the statue at the Vatican, where he's a bit chubbier.
Because there's the one that you put in of there's the Pluto and Persephone.
That's the drinking buddy. That's the one I'm talking about.
Bacchus. I thought Bacchus was just the Latin version of Dionysus.
Yeah, I would believe it to be. Yes.
Yes. Generally,
but no. When it comes to the sort of marble carvers of the Greeks, I mean, Phidias, Praxiteles, and whatever. so they were sort of fairly revered. So I don't think they were sort of seen as the the poor end of sculpture because they did marble.
Dionysus was the Greek, but Silenus was who's often confused for him, is the Roman equivalent.
The pudgy boy.
Who's the pudgy one.
Okay.
Bacchus is very different in himself as well. I'll post it to stream chat so you can see. There's Bacchus on top of his turtle genitals.
That doesn't ring true to me. I've seen Bacchus look very much like Dionysus.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of different levels to the stories, I guess. Probably
Bacchus,
different parts of the empire as well, I guess.
Bacchus is either a tiny person or a fat guy. Like, that seems to be the...
Yeah.
Very strange. I won't claim to know anything about it, but it's all very interesting to me, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to think of modern day examples, and there was one that kind of made me laugh was when they took down the Colston statue in Bristol, right?
Yeah.
They replaced it with a statue of a black woman doing some sort of salute, I think.
Yes. Yeah,
and I remember looking at it.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember looking at it, and I was thinking, well, that's actually not a bad statue, as statues go, considering that they could have put up some sort of modern art monstrosity. And then I realised that it had actually been cast out of resin, not carved or anything.
Yeah, and it was a scan. They 3D scanned her body.
Oh my god! I mean, that's quite cool in itself, but you can't really compare it, right, from a skill point of view.
No, absolutely not. No, I mean, basically, you've put someone in a cubicle and asked them to hold a posture, and that's not the same thing as standing in front of a slab of marble and going, okay, what are we going to do today?
Yes, and as you say about Michelangelo, just going from one side to the other through the rock.
It's it's something else. It needs an insight into the human body and the functioning of the human body that most of us haven't got, even if we could carve marble like that. So even if we were stonemasons, so we would know how to handle the actual rock, to get these figures to look as if they're holding a natural posture when they're slouching a bit and whatever. Right. It's that understanding that these folks have got, and that they, beyond that, can somehow imbue the whole thing with some sort of life.
Yes, and you can see even with the Pluto and Persephone one, like the man's arm is obviously tense, like you can see the muscle standing out.
Yeah,
I would have to say, if I were born as the son of a stonemason, I would be stoned to death for my ineptitude. I was so useless.
Well, you would have been doing it since you were old enough to hold a chisel.
Well, I mean, there is one. I think it might be Borghese. There's one example. There are very few examples where you actually can compare like with like. But there was a Sicilian who I believe did some work for Bernini, because Bernini didn't do all of it himself. So he had a lot of rough work done by other sculptors. And if he wanted some lace work or something like that, that's when he would ask this Sicilian to do some of the work for him. Because Bernini was producing that many statues, it was impossible for one guy to basically rough out all the statues. But there is a bust of the same cardinal. I think it's Cardinal Borghese, and the Sicilian had made one, and Bernini made one. And the Sicilian, because he was so good at intricate work, he really went in terribly, terribly intricately. And you would think, therefore, that must be the better bust. But it's actually the other one, the Bernini one, that is famous, because even though it's much less detailed, it looks as though the man's about to blink. He somehow captured him in mid-motion. And the character of the figure is, of the man is perfectly encaptured within the face. And they said of Bernini that he made caricatures of, he would do sketches, but mainly he did caricatures. He wanted to actually capture the character of the person. So he would make a few caricatures for himself, so he would remember the character of the person when he got back to it.
May I just say, these busts are fantastic, though.
Are we talking the Borghese, the Cardinal Borghese?
I mean, I'm looking at the different Bernini busts at the moment. I just searched Bernini bust. And they're just so many. I mean, look at this one of Jesus. That I'll pop it in the stream chat for you.
He is. He was the one who said, "I can shape marble like wax."
It really looks
that was his famous boast, and there are wonderful stories about Bernini, because of course he really put his mark on Rome. If you go to Rome, you can't miss Bernini. He's everywhere in Rome. And,
yes, I want to go back to Rome as soon as I can.
He was the ultimate show-off. Yeah. So at one point it is said he had every sculptor in Rome working for him. So they were all busy, roughing out statues and whatever for him. So he would give them the instructions, this is what I want. They would then start off, and then he would arrive and finish it off as the master. Because if you think of it, the St. Peter's Square, where you've got those two wings extending from St. Peter's Cathedral, over each column there is a statue. Each one of those is a Bernini statue.
Yeah, you don't even register how incredible they are because they're just surrounded by so much.
The amount of work the man would have had to do, it would have been beyond him. So yes, he had to subcontract. That's the last one you've just put up. That's the Borghese. That's the Cardinal Borghese bust I'm talking about. The one with the sort of moustache and goatee. And there is one done by the Sicilian sculptor of the same guy. So you've got a perfect ability to compare the abilities of one really great sculptor and another one who was just astronomical, one of the greats of history. And Bernini just blasts the other one out of water.
Yes, I see what you say about him looking like he's about to blink.
It's he had this ability, and when you want to, Apollo and Daphne, put in Bernini and Apollo and Daphne. That's his showpiece.
Apollo, St. Peter's,
Apollo and Daphne.
Yeah.
So the story goes that the god Apollo fancied this nymph, and obviously she is also a sort of supernatural being, if you understand. So, but he is a god. So how do you escape a god? So she turned herself into a tree.
Oh yes, I remember.
So you can see the hairs and her fingers are beginning to sprout into branches with leaves, and her leg is turning into a tree trunk.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is in full motion, and that is sort of Bernini going, okay, can anybody compete, please? Form an orderly queue.
I mean, at the time, I guess people would have been familiar with the story, but they would have never seen any sort of visual representation of it.
I mean, just look. Yeah. I mean, you've got the figures, you've got the leaves and that sort of thing, but look at the terrain as well. Like he's got earth in there, he's got wood in there, he's got the stone coming out of the tree, which is just with the roots.
Well, there is this wonderful line in The Agony and the Ecstasy, which is a beautiful film with about Michelangelo, and it's Rex Harrison and what's he called, Mr. Ben-Hur. Oh, good God, Ben-Hur actor, please help me out here.
As if I've seen
Charlton Heston. He plays Michelangelo, and there's one scene in which cardinals are objecting to the nudity that he's painting on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and saying it's all pagan and whatever. And why are you taking cues from pagan art anyway? And he says, yes, it is pagan, but it is it has evolved through time, and it is now a Christian art. And in that same way, when you were saying, Jaws, people were not necessarily familiar with those tales. It's a kind of Christian angle on the pagan past.
Yes.
And, no doubt the cardinals and, the Pope and royalty and whatever, they would more than likely be familiar with the mythology. Always considering they didn't have internet or television, and they didn't have Sherlock Holmes novels to distract them, so a lot of them would be familiar with the classics, and therefore Apollo and Daphne would be a sort of a known entity, and then you've got this godlike Italian sculpture. And yes, it's just unbelievable. But Bernini,
you can imagine everyone at the time having some sort of idea what it would look like in their head, but they would have never seen any.
Yes, and then suddenly somebody makes it physical and goes, there you go. I mean, it is one of the showpieces of sculpture. This is one of those that you will, you can always blow people out of the water with. And, I mean, not so obvious. You're fairly religious. So my guess is the Pietà by Michelangelo is more than likely the one you want to see. It's got it's star billing in St. Peter's Cathedral. You walk in and it's behind glass, but it is Michelangelo's sort of all-time showpiece.
Yes, St. Peter's is kind of outrageous. Like it is like a normal Catholic church, but everything is just bigger.
Yes, yeah.
So you walk in and the normal statues you'd expect to be kind of just below life size, are sort of 12 foot tall.
But Pietà, the Pieta, and it's so it's basically Mary with Christ on her lap, having been brought down from the cross. And it is just sadness and grace and just beauty that aches. And it is just sensational. And this, I think that above all was the statue that kind of made Michelangelo's name.
Didn't he also get in trouble for the Sistine Chapel because there were a load of demons and stuff behind where the Pope sits?
But no, the look, if you look at the Pietà and you just look at her face, it's sensational. Yes, it's good.
Yes. Just look at Jesus' hand. I don't know if you can zoom in. Yeah, so you can see the sort of folded cloth back on itself, and then the veins on his hand and arm as well.
So it's if you also look at it, he's arranged it so it's a triangle from the base to the head of the Madonna. It's a triangle. So he knew what he was doing. He realized that in order to have an overall sort of aesthetic impression, you need to arrange it in a way, because if you otherwise just have a dead body across the lap of a woman, it won't really work very well. So no, he was. You can see. I mean, this is why the Italians of his day called him the Divine One, Il Divino. Because if you can pull this off, if you can make something like that, you are special.
Yeah, just pretty good, eh? Pretty good.
And then, of course, when it comes to Bernini, he was the one who, how should we put it? He had a mischievous edge to him. So what is it? It's the ecstasy of Santa Teresa, is it? and there's another one, the Blessed Ludovica Albertoni. And you look at those two ladies, and you just think, oh wow, are they really having a religious experience, or are they perhaps somewhere else?
Very powerful religious experience, clearly.
In both cases, they were supposed to have undergone some kind of religious ecstasy, and you can sort of see Bernini is kind of playing with you, because it's sort of a nudge and a wink going, we still sure these girls are actually having a religious experience. So yes, there was something to Bernini. He was playful in his art. I mean, he was so masterful, he could do pretty much anything.
Just for the memes, I'm going to search modern sculpture.
Oh yes, that's when that's when death sets in. Yes, I think after Rodin, you don't really need to look for much more.
I mean, that's why I asked the question: is there literally anyone that can do this now? Like just one guy?
Well, I believe there are still artists working and whatever who can do enormous things. But yeah, the picture you just put it up kind of does sum it up. But there are, it's not as if it's completely all gone. It's the same with oil paintings. There are still some painters around who will do portraiture.
To be fair, if you're going to learn art at school or whatever, then I'm sure you would do painting. But sculpture is something that you kind of have to go and do yourself.
It's that thing, isn't it? It's more than likely the greatest of the lot. And what is so terrifying is when you hear of Michelangelo and Leonardo, that they could do both. And then on top of that, they could do a bit of engineering and architecture just to top it off.
Da Vinci is probably the ultimate polymath in that area, right? He did it all.
Well, the scary bit about those two is you have to understand they are sons of Florence, okay? And sort of Renaissance Florence isn't that large.
No.
And you've got contemporaries, so you have got Michelangelo and Leonardo living there at the same time. And lo and behold, they didn't get on.
No, because I thought wasn't Michelangelo quite a large sort of muscular guy?
Yes, Da Vinci was a tiny little nerd. Yes. He was a
tiny little
nerd. Leonardo was more bookish type. And of course, there is a lot made of Michelangelo's possible homosexuality. Whereas of course these days it's always says, "Oh, he was." Well, we're not really sure. We're not really sure. But you just look. You think of these two characters, and you've got the big, heavily built, powerful brute that is Michelangelo, and then you've got the kind of spindly, long-haired chap that is Leonardo, and you just go, okay, how are these two going to get along?
It's the fact that there are these two sort of masters in all of history that lived down the road from each other at the same time.
Yeah,
there's basically nobody better in all time.
And then, of course, while Michelangelo is painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, Raphael is painting the room next door. I mean, it's just at that particular time. If you have a time machine, that's one of the things you want to go and see.
I wonder what the sort of societal conditions that produce that level of, I guess, genius is. Like, there must be something about something in the water, right?
You need some sort of spark. But above all, you also need some sort of mentality. There needs to be some sort of national mentality. So when you look at Romans and you look at Greeks, the Greeks were the ones that created pretty much, the ancient world as we know it. And the Romans, they spread it, but they invented next to nothing. Given how long they were around, they invented next to nothing compared to the Greeks.
But they perfected.
And when it comes to their artists and whatever, they were really all Greeks.
I mean, I guess I'm thinking more like they will invent architectural techniques and weapons of war and things like that.
To be more cynical. To be more cynical, is there also the case of it's a question of what people are commissioning as well. So it's like what are the things which, I mean, we poo-poo a lot of this modern art, but that's what the market is currently demanding.
Yes.
You know, like the government is not commissioning Apollo and Daphne.
You see,
it is.
I will give you something to think about.
Oh, you can give me something.
When it comes to modern art, when it comes to sculpture, but mainly when it comes to paintings, one of the things that's so striking about modern art paintings is the size of the canvases. They're all gargantuan. Yeah. And the thing you need to consider is just consider the amount of buildings that would require art produced in America with humongous lobbies that need something stuck on the wall.
Yeah.
And that's when you realize, hang on a moment, if you go about it the Joshua Reynolds way, you're never going to get there. So if you can just have a giant sort of canvas the size of half a tennis court, and then you start flinging paint at it, like that, you can actually produce sufficient art for all the demand. So it's almost as if you're industrializing the artistic process.
Yes, whatever is demanded by the market is a product of the society.
My guess is, if the market could have demanded it, they would have loved, Leonardo da Vinci paintings on all the walls. But that would just be impossible for the artistic community to produce in the necessary quantity.
And also in the necessary time. This is the other thing.
Yes.
When you look at some of these paintings, especially even more modern paintings and that sort of thing, where there's war and there's armies, and you look and every single soldier has their own distinct personality painted into them, and you just look at it, and if you're a painter in this day and age, where they say, well, actually you've got to produce this thing within 3 months, as opposed to across 5 years or something, it's completely ludicrous to expect the same level of quality in much less time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So what I will say about the Renaissance artists, as I said, if your father was a stonemason and you wanted to, or you were being pushed through that as well, you'd be doing it since you could walk and hold a chisel, right?
Yeah,
you go and become an apprentice. You wouldn't go to have a general education and then go to university to do it. You'd be doing it your whole life.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, you had these things, the school of so and so, the school of such and such. So that's how there is some questions regarding, the actual sort of pedigree of some paintings, because one wonders, is this the master who painted it, or is this actually one of his pupils? So these folks would take on apprentices who would stay with them for years and would, of course, try and learn from them everything they possibly can. And eventually, at some point, they would get a commission here or there, and with that, they could hope to make their names. But yes, you would have these sort of masters would more than likely have half a dozen people traveling with them at any given time, and they would be sort of assistants who would do some of the sort of dog's body work, like mixing paints and stuff like that. But at the same time, they would also, get the opportunity to work in the studio and thereby acquire the skill that, the skill set you needed to eventually become a master of your own. But yes, this required you dedicating a substantial part of your life to possibly becoming a master. But there's no guarantees, because the only way you can find out whether you've got the talent or not is by trying. And it may well be that you're trying and eventually you just turn out to be, well, fairly good at painting, but you're not actually a great artist.
The only discipline, I suppose, that I can think of which still operates on similar rules is, of all things, cooking. So when you're learning the different schools of cooking and that sort of thing, you go to France to learn French cuisine, to live and work and breathe
you
French.
You go to a known chef, yes,
and you effectively supplicate yourself before them.
Yes, and you are a little sous chef that gets kicked around the kitchen, yes,
and that sort of thing.
That's an interesting thought. Yeah, I hadn't considered that.
Especially, I mean, a lot of I know it because I was watching, of all things, a cooking show on Netflix some years ago about a Brazilian chef who basically said he went and he learned and he tried to become a French chef, and they said the reason you can't do this is you're not French, basically. And then he was very good, very talented, but they said you're missing that thing which the French have that you don't have, and this then inspired him to go and operate his own restaurant under a Brazilian style and really basically coax out and develop the Brazilian style into what it was, and it's been
but
very
that means
successful.
That eventually he agreed with them.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Gentlemen, as delightful as it is discussing these things with you, I am going to go through the super chats now, as we are in the last 15 minutes of showtime, so we'll see how we are. Tim Cornish last week, we obviously missed this before the end, says Nescafe Gold part of the stranded Nescafe Gold is part of the stranded Suez cargo. Has anyone checked in on AA? Yes. He's clearly been suffering. If you've been watching his good friend Morcar's Dark Souls playthrough, you'll know full well that he's struggling in that regard, because the stress of that friendship is clearly intonated in the in those recordings. Yeah. The Civic Nationalist today says, I've come to the conclusion that the Britisher is as old as Her Majesty, before the dawn of time. It is clear because of ailments he collects. Britisher?
Absolutely no contradiction there, yes. When it comes to ailments, I mean, if having ailments were an Olympic discipline, then I would be sort of the equivalent. What was that rower? The chap, the guy who famously said, if I ever get in a boat again, you can shoot me on television. And then 4 years later, he was there again at the Olympics, winning another gold.
Is it Redgrave?
That's the one. Yes, I would be the Steve Redgrave of Britain in the ailment discipline. Except sadly, there isn't one.
Isn't it amazing? You're both perpetually 20 years old, also as old as time, and you've also collected enough infirmity for a small, a family of 5,
Yes, yeah. I mean, when it comes to the family of 5, I am both the grandparents and any adopted grandparents.
I maintain it's because you spent too much time with those netball teams you're constantly accusing me of liaising with, Britisher. You have no one to blame.
I'm not so much
yourself.
Accusing you of liaising with them, but I won't disagree.
Christian says we was Kangs. Yes, the Black History side of things. Thank you very much, Christian. EC90 says, have you been following what's been happening with Stephen Crowder? I signed up to Mug Club. Everyone else should too. Screw YouTube. I've not followed Stephen Crowder in a very long time, but
neither have I, really.
I don't know.
Has he been demonetized again or something? I caught a whiff of something going on. Once again, I think he's fallen foul of some authority, whether it's YouTube or Twitter or whatever.
Oh, he was suspended from the partner program, so he could no longer monetize.
So he's basically been demonetized. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, are we surprised? It's insane what's going on, and it is extremely irritating to constantly hear people say, "Oh well, no, it's not happening. This is all just sour grapes and things. No, it's clearly happening. If you run a channel and you fall afoul of them and you see what things they get up to, oh my god, yes, it's happening.
Yeah, it's horrific.
When I did a recent video, I was stuck on 2,269 views for hours, and you just go, well, this can't be. I don't believe that not a single soul is watching right now.
Yes, statistically speaking, it's outrageously unlikely.
British just sitting there like, I'm popular, damn it! Again. I'm more popular than YouTube is demanding. Clearly, somebody must be watching. This is improbable.
Well, yes, but I mean, it's remarkable that for the first few hours you get 2,200 views, then it suddenly stops. And then after that, it starts going again in the way it was before. But you just go, yeah, this is ridiculous. They've just somehow something is suppressing it. And I don't believe for a moment that it wasn't being watched. It was being watched, but they were just refusing to count it.
Yes, you're always being watched, Britisher, if you know what I mean.
Well, I mean, they've got algorithms checking all sorts of things.
Yes, Britisher, and people will appreciate this, but yes, this deserves its own topic at its own time. That Indian dude says, "Feel free to correct me, but isn't it the work of Western scholars that? Isn't it the work of Western scholars? I assume he means through the work of Western scholars that Africa has history of ancient Ethiopia, Eritrea, the kingdom of Aksum, and so on."
Precisely.
I think Ethiopia is one of the oldest Christian kingdoms, right?
As far as I'm aware, yes. Oh, it's also the only place not to be colonized, right?
It is. I was reading about the India and English relationship to Ethiopia.
Go on.
The Ethiopians took a load of I think they were English ambassadors prisoner during the sort of Victorian. Yes, and they this is one of the first times they used the telegraph, I think, to send out orders. So they got a whole load of Hindus from India. They sailed across from India, taking an entire prefabricated port with them, including a prefab railway. Set it up on the coast. Went up to the king of Ethiopia's mountain fortress, stormed the place. The man committed suicide and then rescued, I think, the majority of the prisoners.
You know what this means?
But go on.
IKEA owes us reparations.
IKEA military railway.
It was basically they thought they were beyond reach because they're so inaccessible, and the Brits. You can say it was about those particular missionaries or whatever, but instead it was a demonstration of power, as in, we want to show you, but also any other possible, tin pot dictators, that they can't do this. So we will make a demonstration of power. If you think you're just too inaccessible for us to get to you, you're wrong. And yes, they marched an entire army into Abyssinia and sorted things out and then left again.
Yes, but most of the army were Indians. Hindus.
Yes, I believe so. In fact, prepare for the not so obvious groan, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, there is a Flashman novel that deals with that particular campaign.
Of course there is. And I'm sure it's terribly entertaining as well, British.
It is, in fact, terribly, terribly entertaining. As are all Flashman novels. People read Flashman.
It's on my list of things to read when I'm not so busy. At the moment, I'm not so obvious, but when I'm not so busy, it'll be on my list of things, along with watching films like Zulu and Ben-Hur and all that jazz. So, that crime guy says, "How did my rebrand not make the news, NSO? I don't know who that crime guy could possibly be. He looks an awful lot like a kind of tea-based beverage that we're familiar with. But here, yes, the teabag who lives, or whatever it is that he was before, has rebranded himself as that crime guy. And if you like true crime, that's the channel you need to check out." Hades XY says, "Dionysus is one of the oldest gods. Known as Twiceborn, He is the god of wine, lust, and madness. He also gave...
I believe that there's some ancient cult of Dionysus that is supposed to have quite a lot of roots to early Christianity.
Excuse me, Joz. I wasn't finished.
Sorry.
He also gave King Midas his golden touch. I didn't know that he gave Midas the golden touch. But there you go. Now, Jaws, now you can wax lyrical about the cult of Dionysus. That's fine.
Well, I basically said all I was going to say, that there's some speculation that early Christianity kind of merged with this ancient cult of Dionysus that had a lot of similar beliefs.
Well, the same thing is said about Artemis. Because Artemis is believed to be the oldest deity of them all. So we think that she kind of got adopted westward from somewhere in India. And the Romans turned her into Diana.
The goddess of chastity being the oldest deity, is that what you're saying?
And there is some theory that she may have in Christianity morphed into Mary, Mother of God.
Ooh.
Yeah, well, she's quite sort of. I mean, if you want to go that she's very ancient, she's quite wild, I guess, sort of hunting and that.
Well, it wasn't. I believe I heard once that the you know how they had these large sort of meetings, these congresses in which the church decided the faith.
Oh yeah, what are they called? Yes, go
on. And I believe the one which decided on Mary, Mother of God, effectively being given a special status in the Christian faith, was actually held in, was it Ephesus, where she had her temple? Was that at Ephesus or Pergamum? I think it was
Ephesus sounds familiar, yeah.
So again, it would kind of hint at the fact that how the Christian faith made Saturnalia into Christmas. So it may also be that they're basically sitting in the city of the most powerful, most ancient female goddess on earth, going, "We need a woman."
We need a woman, chaps. The British out of context 2021. We need a woman. All right, chaps. Well, I think that really brings us to the end. That's about 2 hours, the usual runtime. Given that it's a week with very little news, I'm very glad that we managed to fill the time. I hope that people in the chat really enjoyed the tenor and the tone and the topics of conversation for this evening. And as always, I'd like to thank my guests. Thank you very much to Joz for coming on again for a second time.
No worries, glad to be back.
And thanks to Britisher for returning to us.
I was glad to be able to introduce some marble nudity.
You know, of course, that because it's Easter, or it has been, it's going to be like you resurrected over the course of the week, right?
Well, why not?
The Britisher lore deepened, ladies and gentlemen. All right, everybody. I hope to see you next week as well for another episode of Fake Accents Unite. I hope that you have a fantastic time, and until then, please keep well. Take care, everybody, and good night.
Toodle pip.